Okay, today's daf is Shabbat Nun Bet. We're going to start right at the top. We finished with that story. I just wanted to point out one more thing about the story. If you remember, we were talking yesterday about if you put something on an animal, some sort of harness, which is more than what you need for that animal, the whole topic was, is that considered a masoi, something the animal's carrying that's unnecessary, and therefore the animal is not allowed to go out with it on Shabbat, or is it not? So we ended the daf by saying that Rav Huna Bar Chia said in the name of Shmuel. I want you to remember this because we're going to come back to it. He said in the name of Shmuel, keep that in mind, that halacha ke Hananya. We hold like Hananya, that just as Hananya was more lenient in the third parak we saw him about cooking on Shabbat, also he's more lenient about this issue, that if it's extra protection for the animal, it's still not considered a masoi. Okay, and therefore a masoi is a burden on the animal, and therefore the animal is allowed to go out with it on Shabbat. Then we had this funny story where the two rabbis were walking and one passed the other one, and then the other rabbi got upset, and he basically, made up a halachic question asking about this to basically say, oh, so if you have a donkey who's crazy like my donkey, and even though a normal donkey would be extra protection, would this be considered extra? Would it be a burden for my donkey? And then to which he answered, your father said that we pass him like Hananya, so it doesn't matter your donkey or any donkey, basically any donkey who goes out with this kind of extra protection, it wouldn't be an issue. So now what I ended by saying that I thought he answered him saying your father was almost a way of kind of showing I'm annoyed with you, what kind of question you're asking, even your father said this and why are you bothering me? But in the Steinsaltz and the Koren, they had a footnote that basically suggested the opposite. So I wanted to bring both perspectives, and maybe by saying, look, your father said this was a way of showing respect to him and saying, I understand and I respect you and I understand that you didn't mean to do this. And maybe it was a way of showing I forgive you. Now you have to wonder why they didn't actually have the conversation and why they weren't frank about each other about this whole thing, and why he didn't say, listen, I'm really sorry I passed you. So also there was a footnote that kind of indicated that maybe he wanted to say, sometimes you think someone's upset with you, you're not really sure. So I don't know if this is exactly the way they were saying it, the Steinsaltz, but this is how I read it, that sometimes you think that someone's upset, but you're not really sure. They didn't actually say anything to you. So it would be awkward to start going over to them and saying, listen, I know you're upset with me. And the person will look at you, what, are you crazy? I'm not. So he tried to do it in a way that was kind of backhanded, just in case he was upset with him, or maybe he just didn't want to say it outright. Maybe it would make it worse if he said, I know you're angry with me. And then they get into a whole thing. Well, you did this and you did that. And maybe he just thought this is a better way to do it. Anyway, it teaches you about human behavior and how people, what's the best way to react to something, or maybe, yes, maybe this was good, maybe it wasn't. Anyway. Okay, again, it depends on how you read the conclusion of it. Did he forgive him or didn't he? Which you could view in both ways also. As usual, the Gemara leaves things open, which is often the way things are there. Tana de Be Menashe. Okay, we're on line number 4 on Nun Bet. In the house of Menashe, they brought a braita. Es shechakakla ben karneha yotz'a ba'afsar b'Shabbat. If you have a goat and they made a hole, little indentation in the karnaim, the horns of the animal, so then the animal can go out with this afsar, with a muzzle. The assumption here is that if you just put it around its face or its head like normal muzzles, well, in A's, a goat is going to basically shake its head back and forth and it's going to fall off. And if it falls off, then that's considered a problem, as we mentioned yesterday, because if it falls off, someone might come to carry it, right? The owner might want to pick it up off the floor and carry it for Amod and Rishon Rabim. So by Rav Yosef. So now Rav Yosef is going to suggest, what if you didn't, it's kind of annoying, it's a hard work to start making a hole in the horn of the animal. So he suggests, Tahavla bizikna mahu. What if you put it in its beard? Okay, right? The animal has those hairs coming out like a beard-like hairs. So what if you tied the muzzle to the hairs? So now you might say, Ma'u kevan di'im menatachla kaivla. If the animal would try to shake it off, it's going to be painful because it's going to pull the hairs, and the animal's not going to do that, and therefore, lo atya leniftucha, he won't end up shaking it off. Or Odilma Zimning de Rafe Vinafil Va'atila Tui Arba Amopurusha Rabim. Or do we say that no, it still could fall off because something tied on to the hairs isn't necessarily a very strong, not tied on so strongly, and you might end up carrying it over Rishut Rabim for Amba. So the Gemara says, Iku. We don't really know the answer to this question, and therefore we move on. Tnan Hatam. Says further on in Shabbat, it says, we're going to see this on Nun Dalet, you can't go out with the cow can't go out with the ritzuah shebein karneh. Okay, if you put between its horns a strap, can't go out. Now, why is that? Well, a cow doesn't really need a lot of protection. A cow doesn't run off, and if you just stand behind the cow, you can prod the cow along, and you don't need anything with it. So now, they say, so therefore it says, a cow can't go out with the ritzuah shebein karneh. Amar Rabbi Yomi Bar Abba, Pligi Bar Rav Ushmuel. He says, Rav and Shmuel actually have a machloket about this. Chad Amar bein lenoi bein l'shamer asur, v'chad Amar lenoi asur u'l'shamer mutal. So one said, whether it's for decorative purposes or whether it's to protect it, either which way it's forbidden. And one of them said, no, lenoi asur, if it's for decorative purposes, it's forbidden, because that's unnecessary. But l'shamer, if it's to protect the animal and to keep him in place, then it would be mutar. Now, by the way, what is this like? This is like what we learned on yesterday's daf about you don't need it, but if you're using it anyway, it's what we call shmirah yitera, maybe it's not considered a masur. Okay, and maybe you'd be allowed to use it. So one of them seems to say this is okay. So now the question is, we want to know which one says what. So Amar of Yosef, Tistayim de Shmuel Huda Amar Lenoi Asur L'Shamer Mutar. It seems like Shmuel's the one who said, and I remember I told you to remember the previous daf about Shmuel, he said halacha kechananya. He says halacha kechananya, then shmirah yitera would be allowed. By the way, I just dawned on me now that the case here is a little bit different, because shmirah yitera generally means if you put one thing on, it'll work, but you put something stronger on, you're basically saying the difference between putting something weak or something strong. Here, we're talking about that the animal doesn't need anything at all, and yet you're putting something on the animal. So they're a little bit different. It's not necessarily the same, because you might say, well, even though this is shmirah yitera in the earlier case that we were talking about, if you don't have anything, well, then you need something to protect the animal, and therefore we allow it even if it's heavier than normal or stronger than normal. But in this case, you don't really need anything, so you might view it differently. Gemara views it still as the same, because you still need it. You wanted the animal to be able to control it, even though you don't really need it for those purposes. So therefore, we're assuming Shmuel is the one who says this. The Amar of Huna Barchia Amar Shmuel, that was the quote from the previous Amud. Halacha kechananya. Okay, paskins like Chananya, which would mean that he thinks it's okay if you're using it for protective purposes. Amar le Abaye Adraba. No, actually, it should be the reverse. Tistayim de Shmuel hu Amar bein lenoi bein l'shamer asur. It's really makes more sense to say that Shmuel is the one who says whether for Noi, whether l'shamer should be forbidden. Why? The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, because Rav Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. Now we're going to quote something else we saw yesterday. If you remember, he said, right, they asked the students of Rebbe, what if you flipped and put you put one on the other? Amar lefanav, and then he answered him, right? Shmuel answered Rabbi Yehuda and said, this is important because Shmuel says this, Rabbi Yishmael Amar lefanav, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, Kach Amar Abba, Arba behemot yotzop afsar, Sufa pereva gamal b'chamor. Sorry, I didn't say that right. Not that Shmuel says to Rabbi Yehuda, sorry, my mistake. Rabbi Yehuda is saying this whole thing in front of Shmuel, that they asked the question in front of Rebbe, and Rebbe answered, right? Rebbe answered that Amar lefanav, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, Kach Amar Abba, Arba behemot yotzop afsar, Susa pereva gamal b'chamor. We're going to come back to the statement a few times. The Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi said that my father said there's 4 behemot that go out with an afsar, sus, peri, gamal, and chamor. And what did he say? We can infer from here, lav lemeute gamal b'chatam. Doesn't it seem to indicate that not a gamal with a chatam, a gamal can only go with an afsar? So what does it seem to imply? That according to Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, which is Shmuel, that's what we're looking for, you can't go out, right? He suggests here that maybe one can't go out if it's overly protecting the animal. So the Gemara's answer, now we have two contradictions. On the one hand, he says halacha kechananya. On the other hand, in this discussion, he was suggesting that extra protection would be a problem. So, interesting answer, smeha mekameha. Erase the second source that we just quoted and keep the first one. To which the Gemara questions, why did you decide to eliminate that source? Why did you eliminate the source where he says the halacha is like Hanan? So they say here, because we have another statement. Rav Chia bar Ashi amar Rav, bein l'noi bein l'shamer asur, Rav Chia bar Avin amar Shmuel, l'noi asur l'shamer mutar. So we have another statement by two rabbis, and now we finally, right, you wonder why they didn't bring this in the first place. From this statement, it's very clear that Rav's the one who holds that it's a problem, and Shmuel's the one who holds that it's okay. So we end up now with a very clear conclusion. Rav doesn't allow it, and Shmuel allows it. So now we're going to have a question on Rav. Meitube. Bring a Tannaitic source to contradict Rav. Kashra ba'aleha b'mosera kshera. Now we're talking not about a regular cow, but a red heifer, the para aduma. There's all sorts of laws about a para aduma. We're going to see, it says in the Torah, you have to pick a para asher lo aleha om, that never had a yoke upon it, that never did any work. Okay, now this is going to be relevant to us because if the animal is wearing something that was unnecessary and it's considered a masoi for Shabbat, then it will also be considered that ala aleha ol, that actually it was working, which is going to mean then that it would not be allowed to be used as a para aduma. So now it says if the owner tied around this para aduma a mosera, this strap around its neck, kshera, it's going to be kshera. So if you view this rope around its neck as a masoi, as a burden, the Torah said it can't have any sort of yoke upon it. So if it had this rope, and the rope is considered a masoi for Shabbat, then it would basically forbid the para aduma from being able to be used. So Amar Abai, now we're going to have three different explanations as to why the para that has this mosera on it is actually still going to be kshera, the para aduma. Because Abai says, we talked about before that a normal cow doesn't need, you can basically lead the cow very easily, but Abai is going to say that's only if you're leading the cow short distances. But if you're going to take the cow from city to city, already you're going to need something to pull that animal. So the para aduma that we're referring to, that had the mosera on it, that's allowed to be a para aduma, and it's not considered a burden, is because this rope was used to pull the animal from city to city. Rava Amar Shane para de dameha yikarim. He says, no, it would be any para aduma. And why is that? A regular cow, you don't need to lead, you don't need it on. But a para aduma is very expensive, as we know from all the sources that talk about the para aduma. It was very rare and therefore cost a lot of money. And therefore, you want to put this rope on it to make sure it doesn't run away because it's so expensive. Which is a better answer than Abai, because Abai would have to say the source is only talking about a case where you were using it to bring it from city to city. But here, this answers it for all cases. Ravina Amar b'mored. This is actually a more unique case where you had a para aduma that was a bit crazy, kind of like the chamor in the beginning of the donkey we saw in the first story, where it was a para that needed it. And that's why if it needs it for its protection, in a case where a para aduma, that particular one was going to need protection, then it would be an issue. Back to the Mishnah. Hasus b'sher. Okay, we have this strange line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says hasus b'sher, which means it can go out with its neck piece. Seems to be some sort of necklace type thing. And then it says in the Mishnah, if you go back and look, yotzim b'chol ba'alei asher, and any animals that wear this kind of necklace, yotzim b'sher v'nimshachim b'sher. Now, why does it say yotzim v'nimshachim? First of all, the topic in the Mishnah all along has been yotzim. They go out with it. Nimshachim means they're pulled by it. Now, until now, we've basically been discussing most of the animals who go out with it, it's because it's an implement used for pulling. So why does it say yotzim and nimshachim? We're going to have two different interpretations. So the Gemara asks, ma yotzim and ma nimshachim? Amar Rav Huna, o yotzim kruchin, o nimshachim. This actually means two different things. Yotzim means you can go out with it if you're using it for decorative purposes even, okay? Even if it's just like a necklace for a nice look for the animal, you're allowed to go out with it. Or nimshachim, or if you need it for pulling the animal. Ushmuel amar, yotzim nimshachim be'en yotzim kruchim. Shmuel says no. Really, yotzim and nimshachim means one and the same. It means you can take it out if you're using it for pulling, but not if it's for decorative purposes. Now it says, B'manita Tana, in a Braita it says, Yotz'in kruchin limashech, which seems to prove Shmuel's position, which is, right, they can go out kruchin if you use it. It's almost like a combination shita. You can have it if it's there for decorative purposes, if it's also used for pulling the animal. So Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef now says, Chazina lehu le'igle debei Rav Huna, yotz'im ba'afsarehen kruchin b'Shabbat. He now testifies that not only did Rav Huna say it's okay to use this for decorative purposes, but he actually acts that way, right? Sometimes people say something's allowed, but yet they don't do it themselves. But he would even go out with his animals, with their afsarehen kruchin b'Shabbat, even if it was just for decorative purposes. Ki anta Rav Dimi. Now we're going to have a few statements of Amoraim, and we're going to try to make sense of all of it. When Rav Dimi came from Israel, Amar Rabbi Chanina, he passed down in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Mulaot. We're now going to move to mules. Okay, mulaot, mule. It sounds like the English word. Mulaot shabbat Rebbe yotzot b'afsarehim. Usually they're called a pered, which we're going to get to, which we saw already. I told you we get back to these arba behemot. We saw about the pered already, if you remember. So Rav Dimi says, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, the mules of Beit Rebbe, yotzot b'afsarehem b'Shabbat. They would go out with their muzzles on them on Shabbat. So they ask the following question: Kruchin o nimshachim, right? Again, we have all these sources that they're just not being clear about it, right? They say they can go out with the muzzle. Well, did he mean with the muzzle because they were using it to pull the animal? Or did he mean with the muzzle because even though it was decorative, it was allowed? So they say Tashma. Let's learn it from here. Not only did Rav Dimi say this in the name of Rabbi Chanina, but Ki'ata Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, when Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came, he said, okay, and I'm going to tell you this on purpose, don't confuse Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda with Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Okay, it sounds confusing. This is Rav Shmuel, the son of Yehuda, as opposed to before, and we're going to quote it again, and that's why I wanted to distinguish, Rav Yehuda was passing down the halacha of Shmuel. That's a different person. So anyway, when Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came from Israel, he said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Mulaot shabei Rebbe yotzot b'afsarehen kruchin b'Shabbat. Now he said specifically kruchin. Okay, he said, otherwise he said the same thing of Rav Dimi, but instead of just saying he went out with the afsar, the mules of Rebbe, they went out, they were kruchin. So Hamarua Rabbanan Kamei de Rabasi. So the rabbi said in front of Rabasi, Had Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, what Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said here, Lo tzricha, wasn't really necessary, because you could have already inferred from Rav Dimi. Mita Rav Dimi nafta, you could have already, there's an assumption here, even though often we have these statements and somebody says this and someone else says that, you don't necessarily assume they heard each other. Here we're assuming he must have known that Rav Dimi already said this, and yet he still went ahead and said what he said. So now he said there was no reason for that. Why? Because if you think, now this was back to the whole question, when he said, right, when Rav Dimi said they were Yotzot b'afsarehem b'Shabbat, did they mean kruchin or did they mean nimshachim? Did they mean just as decorative purposes? Or did they mean they were wearing them specifically to be pulled? So now, let's go back to the two options. So Isal Kadata, they want to basically play out both options. If you want to say that Rav Dimi nimshachim kama, he says nimshachim. Now here comes the tricky part. This is why I specified the Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel and the Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Mida Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel nafka. We could have already learned that from what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. If Rav Dimi was trying to say you can use the afsar for pulling, now first of all, obviously you can use it for pulling. There's no chiddush in that. We know if that's what the mule wears, that's what the mule wears. So now we're going to say, well, maybe it was more than the mule needed. And if it was more than the mule needed, well, we already know, Mida Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel nafka, da Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Again, we keep going back to things we quoted before. Machlifina yulifnei Rebbe, they asked the question in front of Rebbe, shozo b'zo ma'u. What if you put something that was extra and it wasn't necessary? What's the situation? And Amar lefanav, and he said before him, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, Kach Amar Abba, right? Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi testified in front of Rebbe that my father said, Arba behemot yotzot b'afsar, hasus b'hapered, b'hagamal b'chamor. So what do you see here, right? That it's obviously allowed for the mule to go out with an afsara because he said it explicitly, right? Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said it explicitly in front of Rebbe. So therefore, they're basically saying Rav Dimi did not need to say that halacha if it was so clear from this situation, which happened before him. So therefore, since he had no need to say it, it must be that Rav Dimi was talking about kruchim, where it was decorative, and he was adding that, in which case we have to say, well, what was then the last person, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, coming to say if Rav Dimi already said it? So now they say, Amar lehu Rav Asi, itzrich lehu. No, you still needed it. Why? Di'imi de Rav Yehuda nafka. In other words, Rav Dimi was really talking about not kruchim. He was talking about that you needed it to pull the animal. Why? Why did he need it if Rav Yehuda already said in the name of Shmuel, we paskin like this? So, Di'imi de Rav Yehuda nafka, hava amina, amar lefanav lo kibla mine. Maybe if you notice the words in that source, it says, amar lefanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, kach amar Abba, but maybe that wasn't accepted. Maybe he said it, but they didn't end up agreeing with him. So therefore, even though Rabbi Yehuda passed down the name of Shmuel, this story, it could be that this wasn't accepted lahalacha. And therefore, kamashman de Rav Dimi. And therefore, Rav Dimi had to come and say, no, we do hold that way. Don't think we don't. And you can go out, the mule can go out with an afsar if you're using it for protecting the animal. The Ida Rav Dimi havamina, but if we just have Rav Dimi, what would you have thought? Nimshachim, aval kruchin lo, right? You would have thought hanimile that he's only talking about nimshachim. Aval kruchin lo, and therefore kamashman de Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. This was a very complicated way to basically say from the earlier source that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel about Rebbe, maybe it seems to indicate the mule goes out with an afsar and therefore it's used for protective purposes and therefore it's allowed. But you might not have been 100% sure because he quotes in the name of Rabbi Yossi, but maybe they don't hold that way. Came Rav Dimi later on to clarify, we do hold that way. But it's allowed, therefore, at his point, he only allows it for protective purposes. Jump ahead to the next source, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. He's coming to say not only nimshachim, not only if you're pulling the animal with it, but even kruchim, even if it's for decorative purposes. It seems to me like the reason we're allowing for decorative purposes is because maybe since it's something that can be used for both, we allow it for decorative purposes because maybe it can also be used to be pulling. Even if you're not using it for pulling, it's still either, as one could look at it that way, or one could say, even if it's for decorative purposes, that's the clothing of the animal, basically. Just like we can walk out with our clothing, the animal can walk out with the clothing, and this is something generally used for decorative purposes, and therefore there are those who allow it. Okay, moving on now to the last part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, mazina lehen, you can sprinkle the para aduma waters on the item while it's on the animal, and you can also tovlam bimkoman, you can also have the animal go into the water, and if the ring around its neck, the chain around its neck was tameh, was impure, when the animal goes in the water and the kli ends up under the water, it can be purified by the mikvah water. So we're going to have a few questions on this. So the first question is, is this to say that the chain around the neck of the animal is susceptible to impurity? How could it be? And if you know this halacha, but we're going to learn it right now. V'hatnan, doesn't it say in the Mishnah in Kelim, tabat adam tme'ah v'tabat be'ema v'kelim ushar kol tabaot tahorot. The only kind of ring that's considered a utensil that's going to be impure is one that's used for humans to wear, but not animals. If it's for animals, that's not considered a kli. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, okay, we're now going to have two answers to this question. Rabbi Yitzchak says, B'ba'in minoi adam lenoi behema. It must be a case, and now we're going to take this case and say the Mishnah, and this is very often, we call it an ukimta. The Mishnah is talking about a unique case. When it talked about that you can tovel them or put the paraduma waters on, it was talking about a taba'at that was used for a person, some sort of chain or ring that was used for a person, and then was used for an animal, okay? First it was used for a human, and then they decided to use it for an animal. So then it's going to have susceptible to impurities because originally it was susceptible to impurities. The fact that now it's used for an animal, well, once a kli, kind of you could say like this, right? Once a kli, always a kli. Although we're going to question this soon, so not necessarily. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Ho'il v'adam moshech behemet ha'behema. That's the reason. He says, this is true, it's used for an animal, but it's really used for the human. The person pulls the animal with it. That's already considered a kli for a person. Okay, and how do we know this? Milo Tanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Makel shel behema shel matechet mekabel tum'ah. If you have a stick that you use to prod the animal, if it's made of metal, it's mekabel tumah, it's susceptible to impurities. Matam, what's the reason? Because the person needs it for his purposes. Now it's a little bit different because the one we're talking about is actually worn by the animal, but still it's worn by the animal for the human to be able to move the animal. So therefore, it's going to be mekabel tumah. So therefore, matam ho'il v'adam rodeh behen. Hachanami, therefore, likewise, ho'il v'adam moshech behen. Just like there, he prods the animal with it. Here, he pulls the animal with it. The same idea. So we have two answers as to why this tabad is going to be susceptible to impurity. Either we're talking about a case where first it was used by a person and then we switched it to be used by the animal and therefore retains its status of being susceptible to impurity, or because it's serving a human's needs, it will be susceptible to impurity. Now we're moving on to tovlan bimkoman. V'ha'ika chatzitza, but isn't there a chatzitza here because the animal's body is basically in the way, the water doesn't get all the way under. I talked about this when we learned the Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Ami b'sheritchan. It's in a case where you welded it down a little bit so it's looser on the animal and therefore there's space for it to get the water to get to. So now they say, wait a minute, Lema, let's connect this to the previous two terutzim that we saw, the two answers, and let's connect this and say this proves one of them, or at least he holds like one of them. Lema Rabbi Ami ki Rav Yosef spirale. Maybe we should say that Rabbi Ami holds like Rav Yosef, who said that the issue is, and more importantly, he didn't say that we were talking about it was a utensil used for a human that we then switched to the animal. Why? Now we're going to get into all sorts of laws of purity and impurity here. Because if he held like Rabbi Yitzchak, Damar b'ba'im minoi adam lenoi behema, kevan diritchan ave behumase uparchala tumaminayu. If you did this act of ritchan, you basically changed the utensil. You're basically saying, I'm taking this ring that a person was using and I'm now using it for an animal. And once you do an action that changes it from human to animal, you're basically taking off the name kli. It's no longer a human kli. And therefore, it wouldn't be susceptible to impurity anymore. How do we know this? It's not just that they're saying this, but we're going to prove it from a Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah in Kelim, okay, again, we keep getting back to machshava, your thoughts versus your actions. Okay, I told you this is going to come up all over Shas. So here they say, how does a kli become tameh? When let's say you have something that's not really usable, but you decide you're going to use it. This came up with muktzah all the time, right? You designate something that's a rock and you say, I'm using it now as a paperweight. Okay, so if you take a kli and you decide, just here it sounds like in your head, by the way, I didn't even get into the fact that sometimes when they talk about machshava, they actually say you have to say it in words. There's a debate about whether machshava means you think it only or you actually have to designate it in some formal manner, either by verbally. If you remember, even when the rabbi told his students to go down to I think it was the pieces of leather, or was it the wood? And he said to them, think that you're going to sit on these, right? It was the wood pieces. And he said, think that you're going to sit on these, right? Go to them and kind of designate them. How do you designate, right? So again, it's maybe in your head, but maybe you have to be near it. It's unclear from all these sources what exactly machshava entails. But anyway, they say it's obviously different from an action, right? You're not actually doing any real action to it. So they become tameh as soon as you decide, I'm going to use this as a utensil, already it can become susceptible to impurity. Ve'ein olimi tumatan. However, how do they change from something that is susceptible to impurity to something that's no longer going to be susceptible to impurity? That you need much more. Machshava is not enough. You can't just decide, oh, I'm not using this, I'm throwing it away, right? At that point, it's still impure. Ela b'shinoi maaseh. You actually have to do some change to it. So what do you see here? You see that with a shinoi maaseh, you can change something from being pure, susceptible to impurity, to not susceptible to impurity. So once you did this act of ritchan, shouldn't it have changed that taba'at from being usable for a person to usable for an animal, which means it should no longer be susceptible to impurity. So what's the answer? And here's an interesting answer. They're going to distinguish between different ma'asim. Savra to Rabbi Yehuda. He must hold like Rabbi Yehuda Damar. Ma'aseh l'taken lav ma'asehu. If you're changing it to fix it to something else, that's not considered a maaseh that's going to take away the impurity. So you took this utensil that was usable for a person. You now made it usable for an animal by actually doing something. That doesn't mean, even though generally utensils for animals are not susceptible to impurity, that's not going to take away the impurity from it because it was a kli already. The only thing that's going to do it, let's see. So he says, Ditanya, as it says in the following Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this is just Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Just say that Rabbi Ami must have held like Rabbi Yehuda. Ditanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo Amar Shinoi Maseh Letaken Ela Lekalkel. It's only if you do a destructive act. If you take it and you saw off a part of it and you basically show, I don't want to use this anymore, that's a maaseh that will make it no longer susceptible to impurity. But if you take it, it's almost saying like there's 3 levels. There's first level, which is kli for a person. Then we drop it down by a maaseh to kli behema. It's still considered a kli. Even if it started as a utensil for an animal, it wouldn't be. But since it started for a person, it went down to an animal, that's, a maaseh is not going to do anything. If you destroyed it by some act, then it would already not be susceptible to impurity. Okay, now we're going to have another answer. So the first answer about the chatzitza was b'shirikan. The second answer, b'matnitatane b'mechulalin. It's where it has a lot of holes in it, right? Imagine rings attached to each other, and because there's all these holes, the water can get in, and it's not an issue of chatzitza. And now we're going to get off from here till the end. Okay, we're going to stop before the Mishnah today. We're going to have 2 questions that the student from the Galil asked Rabbi Eliezer. Sha'al Talmid Chacham Galil Elyon et Rabbi Eliezer. Shamati shechokim ben tabat letabat. The first one is connected to what we're talking about. The second one is just going to be the same structure of a question about something else. So the student says to Rabbi Eliezer, I heard that there's distinctions between different types of rings. So Amarlo, Rabbi Eliezer says to him, Shema lo shamata ela linyan Shabbat. You must have only heard when it comes to Shabbat about there's different kinds of rings that can be carried, rings that can't be carried. It depends on the type. But de'il inyan tuma, but if you're talking about for impurity's sake, da v'da chadehi. All rings are the same when it comes to impurity. Now, obviously, based on what we said today, that doesn't make any sense, which is what the Gemara is going to question. Ule inyan tuma da v'da chati v'hatnan. Didn't we just learn in a Mishnah? Tabat adam tme'ah v'tabat behema v'kelim shar kol hatabaot tahorot. We do distinguish between rings when it comes to purity and impurity. And rings of animals or other kinds of rings are not susceptible to impurity, only ones used by humans. So what's the answer? Oh, when Rabbi Eliezer said to him, they're all the same, ki ka'amrle, ihu, when he was saying that, nami de adam ka'amrle. He was only talking about human rings. Okay, so we're now limiting Rabbi Eliezer's statement to rings worn by humans. They're all the same when it comes to Chuma. There aren't distinctions made between them. So now they even question that. Okay, it's going to be the same structure. They're going to say, is that really? And then they're going to say, oh, they were only talking about this. And then they're going to say, and that really? There's no distinction? Udadam davida achati, or is there really no distinction within rings? Vahatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita? Tabat shitzchina lachgor b'motnav. Imagine a belt. We've seen this before. Belts sometimes have rings on them to attach the different parts of the belt together. Or l'kasher ba'ben ktefav. Let's say, right, we have some nice normal sleeves, but sometimes they had sleeves that were made of 2 pieces, and they used a ring to clip the sleeves together. Those kind of rings are tehorah. Those are not susceptible to impurity because they're not really utensils, okay? They're not considered rings that are susceptible to impurity. The lo amru tme'ah ela shel etzba bavad. The only type of ring that is tameh is one you wear on your finger. So how could Rabbi Eliezer have said, we don't distinguish between human rings when we do distinguish between rings that humans use? So, ki ka'amrlahu, ihu nami de etzba ka'amrlahu. Very simply, we're going to say, when Rabbi Eliezer said we don't distinguish between rings, he meant rings that go on your finger. Ude etzba davida achati, but wait, really all rings are the same when it comes to impurity, even if you're talking about rings on your finger? Vahatnan, doesn't it say in the Mishnah, in Kelim, tabat shel matechet v'chotama shel amog tme'ahi. Shel amog v'chotama shel matechet tahorah. Okay, we're now going to talk about different materials. Not all material rings are susceptible to impurity. If your ring is made of metal and it has a stamper on it, right? They often have stamps on their rings, was made of almog, which is coral, then it's tme'ah. The ring is tme'ah, impure. But if the ring was made of coral and the stamp was made of metal, it's tahorah. So here you see, even within human rings that are used on one's finger, we're still going to distinguish between coral and metal. So obviously, what are they going to say? You can guess where the Gemara is going. Kika amrle iu nami kula shal matechet kamrle. He was talking only about metal rings. He said when it comes to metal rings, we don't distinguish with tuma. Okay, that's the end. We finally finished that. Now we're going to have the exact same structure with another issue. Va'od shal. Furthermore, that student asked, Shamati shachokim be machat lemachat. I understand that there's distinctions made between different types of needles. Amar le, shema lo shamata ela linyan Shabbat. Maybe you only heard about in terms of Shabbat, what needles you can walk out with in Rashid Arabim and which ones you can't. De'iling and Tuma, because when it comes to purposes of Tuma and Tara, da v'da achati. All needles are treated the same. They're all susceptible to impurity. So now they say, well, the inyan Tuma da v'da achati, again, the exact same structure. Are all needles really the same when it comes to purity and impurity? V'hatnan, machat shenital choda, choha, o okza tehora. If you have a machat, a needle, where you took out the hole of the needle, right, the eye of the needle, or its point, the tip of the needle, it's tehora. That's obvious. Why is it tehora? Because it's no longer usable. You can't use a needle without being able to thread something through. Or if it doesn't have the tip, you can't really sew with it. So, kika amrle bishlema. When he told him there's no distinction between needles, he was talking about whole needles, not broken needles. Ubishlema, davidachati. But now we're going to question that. If it's whole, really, they're really all the same. V'hatnan machat shehelta chaluda. If it rusted, im ma'akevet hatzvira tehora. If it prevents you from being able to sew properly, then it's tehora. V'im lav tmea. But if not, it will be impure. So what do you see? You see again, there's distinctions between needles that are whole, but they're rusty. So the Amr l'debei Rabbi Yanai, the Husha Rishumani Kar. There's a bit of a debate what he's referring to. I'll explain it one way, which is if it prevents your sewing because when you sew, it makes a mark, right? Sometimes if something's rusty, it'll ruin it'll get the rust on your clothing, then it will no longer be susceptible to impurity. So again, you can figure out where the Gemara is going to go with this. Right? Yes, it's true, this is whole, but it's really not usable, right? He was talking only about needles that are they're smooth and they're not rusty. So now again, the Gemara is going to ask, but really all needles that are smooth are all going to be susceptible to impurity in the same way? The Hatanya doesn't it say in the Braita, machat bein nekuva bein ena nekuva mutar l'taltala b'Shabbat. V'lo amrina nekuva ela li'inyan tum'ah bilvat. Now we're going to say dafka something isn't a distinction for Shabbat, but we do make a distinction on when it's for purity and impurity. What is this? A needle that has an eye of a needle, or a needle that doesn't have an eye of a needle. Now this is different from before. Before we were talking about it had an eye of a needle, but it kind of sealed up somehow. But now we're talking about if you have often they would use, what would a needle without the eye of the needle be usable for? For decorative purposes, right? You could put it on your clothes or something. So the way they understand it right now is whether it's for decorative purposes or whether it's not for decorative purposes, mutar l'taltala b'Shabbat. But the only thing about nekuva that they were talking about, the distinction between these two, is for tuma. So therefore, what do you see here? That a needle that doesn't have the eye of a needle in it can't be susceptible to impurity, whereas if it does, then it is. So this seems to indicate that even though that there is a distinction between different types of needles. So what does the Gemara answer? Don't worry about that source. Hatirgama abaya liba deraba bigalme. When they were talking here, they weren't talking about a needle that you would put like a pin on your clothes. That's not what they were referring to. That would also be tameh. Here we're referring to a needle, and then we could say we really don't distinguish between needles, right? Even a needle that's for decorative purposes is going to be susceptible to impurity. The issue here is a needle before, okay, how do you create a needle? First you make the needle, then you make a hole in it. At least that's a possibility of how they did them. So he's saying begalme means it wasn't yet fully created. So when it's not yet fully created, then it's not yet susceptible to impurity. This is what we learned about utensils in general. While you're creating the utensil, there's no impurity. It can't be susceptible to impurity until you finish it. So when they say there's a distinction between nekuva and ena nekuva for tuma, What they mean is, while you're creating the needle, if it doesn't yet have the eye of the needle in it, and here we're talking only about needles used for sewing, and it doesn't yet have an eye of a needle, it's not going to be susceptible to impurity. So again, this was all to try to say, Rabbi Eliezer told the student that there's no distinction between needles. What he means is there's no distinction between whole, perfectly established needles. Once they're created, then they're all susceptible to impurity. Okay, and that's what he meant, and that's where we'll end today. And tomorrow we'll pick up with the new Mishnah about donkeys and what they wear and all sorts of potentially interesting or maybe less interesting cases.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You're welcome.